Welcome back. Okay, let's play with the control for spawning a an area where we can spline sample through here. So what I'm going to do in my elements here, I'm going to do a spline here. This is going to be an interior spline because I want to be able to access this later on. I want this to have a tag as well because we want to be able to find it. Interior spline. Let's compile this, and with my interior spline I want to also make this a closed loop. Okay, you can see my spline has sort of appeared here. Now what I could do, I suppose, with this as well is I could, in my initial sort of blueprint, I can create perhaps like perhaps a sort of a given sort of size and initial placement of these assets here. So again, you can be quite precise with this if you want. I'm not too fussed about doing that. I could sort of arbitrarily sort of pick out a space, but this is going to be modified by our user anyway. But it might be nice to have some predefined size, just so we can see if our seed and spawn and things are working within there. Okay, so that's there. That's working. It's compiled. How do we get this to spawn within our blueprint, especially with these variations that we've got here? Well, what we can do, we don't necessarily need our this. I like to work with a slightly larger graph. What I'm going to do is I need to go and get the spline data for a start. So let's go and get our spline data, and our spline data is the interior spline, and we need to do a spline sampler. Go spline sampler, that's coming in here, and again fairly standard setup for sort of controlling this. We'll do a projection onto get landscape data. None of this is sort of new if you've used PCG on your sort of landscape before. This all sort of very sort of usual sort of stuff. We should be able to start to see our PCG sort of working. As you can see, our spline sampler is working on the spline as opposed to one interior, and I need to set some initial kind of properties for my spline sampler as well. So my initial properties, sort of let's say 30 and 30 in here. So is that actually, yeah, I think it might be, maybe it's a little bit big. Let's try a little bit less, 20 on interior. Yeah, it should be. We seem to be still on the spline here, which is quite interesting. Interior spline, go projection onto the landscape. I imagine this was going to be a slightly more uniform projectile. We have some more boxes. I think for some reason that is not picking up. Oh, I don't want that. It's not picking up my interior spline. Oh, let's tell you what. Let's make the tag bottle spline. I think there might be. Nope, that's still spline sampling. Point seed. Let's modify this in our no, it's definitely projecting on the spline, as you can see here. On interior. That's very strange. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to, I wonder. I wonder if that's just being weird in here. Let's just, I've had this a couple of times, and I'll tell you what I've done. I'm just going to do save all, and I'm just going to reload the level. Maybe this will help as well. Yeah, that should be include actor select and tag bottle spline. Interior, that is interesting. Projection. Let's just try a double check. Let's see. It's definitely projecting on from the landscape. That's definitely not sampling on the interior, which is quite interesting. I wonder. Bottles. No, I mean that. The thing is, I don't want to name put the tag outside of this because that is I'm going to have more than one spline in the longer run. Anyway, I want a spline externally. Bottle spline. And the tag. As always with these things, it is one usual tick box. So it's the unbounded. That's what was keeping it from actually working as an interior surface. So there we go. Unbounded to get that to be an interior. Anyway, what we're trying to achieve is that this is going to now sort of perhaps generate a set of attributes. And again, what we can do here, we had a perhaps a set of variables for the interior as well. We could have a random seed here for the interior as well. So we could have this as an interior seed. That's an integer. We can compile that and give that as a set of random numbers to compile as an interior random seed. Get act property, and we'll have this as property name interior seed. Did we call it? It was interior seed. Interior seed, yeah, that's right. Interior seed. interior seed, and we'll plug that into the seed again here. Okay, not going to make a huge amount of difference right off the bat, but with our perhaps with our transfer on points, what we can do is we can, you know, we can modify these elements, maybe give them small amounts of rotation. I probably wouldn't want to rotate the bottles all that much. Maybe X and Y. No, I don't think I want the bottles rotated at all. Really. 360. In there, we don't want the. Okay, so there we go. We've got our properties sort of inheriting this. Is that an interior seed? There we go. Bringing this through. There we go. Our bottles sort of randomly created here. I mean, again, you might want to. You know, is that too much of a rotation? Anyway, in terms of the scale, we could again, you know, have a random variation for scale, 0.95, 1.15. In terms of scale variations, what we could do here really is we could try and work out whether these are overlapping. And one way we could do that is with distance. And actually, what we can do with two of the distance elements on top of each other, what we can do is we can check the center to center, set density, and what we should get is if there are elements overlapping and we set them, change the maximum distance, essentially what we get is where there's aspects of these boxes that are too close to each other, they get a darker distance node. And that's one way of almost doing like a sort of a self-prune, if you like. You can kind of control that and do like a self-prune on there as well, and then do like a density filter. You know, everything above or below a certain threshold is sort of filtered out really, so you can you can kind of get the idea of doing something like that. Another way of doing this would be like a self-prune node here as well, so you could do it with a self-pruning node as well. So, and again, you can sort of change your sort of filters for sort of how much sort of self-pruning happens depending on the extent of the elements. Now, one of the things that perhaps what you might want to do is then do, you know, some static mesh spawning for the bottles that are in here as well. Now again, depending on how you want to sort of portion this out, obviously if we just do a static mesh spawner over here and then we come in and grab a mesh entry for the bottles. So we've got the props here. Go and grab it. Go and grab the jugs, and sort of add that in. Obviously, we've got an issue with the sort of the size of these elements, and this is where we can come back to perhaps our initial spline size over here. Excuse me, and we can change the size of things like the interior sample spacing, and the size of the elements in terms of how often, you know, the spacing between these two you know is put. So perhaps the spacing needs to be higher, and maybe the bottle size is to be less. As you can see, the self-pruning is almost doing a bunch of the work here. Let's put that in. There we go. It's a bit organized and uniform, I think, in the sense of the self-pruning has sort of called everything out that's sort of arbitrarily rotated. What's quite nice about this though is you can come through. Now I would check the sort of the sizes of these bottles. These are about sort of 60 units, these ones, except for this chunky one here. So jug 3 and 4, what we could do here is we could come into our static mesh spawner, mesh entries, and if we do a filter by static here as well, it's going to speed up us finding the static mesh entries and checking and sort of creating elements like this in each case. And as you can see, that's created a variation in those bottles. There are some overlaps in there as well, and maybe this is where you might want to, you know, change or, you know, change the points in here as well. You could even do a bounds modifier over here as well, and then within the bound settings is scale perhaps the bounds up a little bit, you know, 1.1, 1.2, and then have that plug into the self-pruning and see if that is going to, it doesn't look like it's taking out too many meshes. That's done a couple. You can see that sort of, there we go, that's, you can see that's sort of doing a little bit more of the work there, which is kind of nice. And obviously as we bring these in, we get a few more of the bottles sort of staggered out. So that's been pretty good. Quite like that. Now if you did want to do something, I quite like that self-pruning, to be honest. If you did want to do something a little bit different with this, I suppose what you could do is you could, coming out of the other side of this, you could run a density filter. Oh, actually, let's do a attribute noise. Let's do an attribute noise here, and essentially, let's turn this off for a second. Essentially, what we can do with an attribute noise, we want to set. Make sure this isn't sampling anything else. Set this to be density. We should be getting this to be set density. There we go. Anything's coming out. So what we could do with this is we could do filter by range. And then essentially with the density, we could say maximum and minimum threshold, constant threshold of a float value. And essentially what you're going to do is say, okay, well, let's do a maximum threshold and to be fair, I mean, you could do it a density filter like this, but it's just another way of doing that. You could do a filter for sort of where you want specific elements, and essentially everything that's outside this static mesh spawner, we could have that set to be static mesh of this bigger bottle or a broken bottle or something like that. There we go. One of the things I do quite like, that's okay. I think what I'd probably do with this is you'd have to change the range, I think, to essentially try and have less of the big bottles. And one of the problems with that is, you run that, you can't quite do the same as the weighting that you have with these in this static mesh spawner. So you have to do it inside of filter by range here. I don't think we've actually got any of the bigger bottles here as well, so that's a bit annoying. Let's do that a little bit more. Let's sort of modify a couple of those in. There we go. And there, again, you might have to do anything inside here. We might need to sort of resize. Do a bounds modifier. Self-pruning. We could even run it as a difference on here as well. And this will remove anything that we, you know, is sort of intercepted by this as well. So there we go. So anything we've got the big bottles is going to sort of take those away as well. Okay, let's take out the debug over here. There we go. So we've got some scattered bottles inside here. Now what's quite nice about this, if we plug this in to our spline sampler, if we do this with a execution dependency and we plug this into variation 3, then this will only work if our variation 3 is set. So variation 1 and variation 2 doesn't have anything. Variation 3 has some bottles. Awesome. Okay, right. That took a little bit longer than I would have liked, but we did get a nice sort of solution to that. I'm going to stop here, and then in the next video we'll perhaps see if we can sort of pick this up again for some final touches for the exterior, and maybe spawning some grass outside here. And I think that should be us pretty much done with this. So let's stop there.